There is an old man dying in Egypt, and he is giving his sons directions to a grave. His name is Jacob. He is 147 years old, and he has one request left in him. Carry my body out of this country. Take me back to Canaan, to the cave in the field of Machpelah, the burial place of my family. And then he starts naming the people who are already lying there. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah. And then 5 words that stop the whole story cold. And there I buried Leah. Now hold on. This is the man who worked 7 years for a woman he loved, got cheated, and worked 7 more. 14 years of labor for one face. And that woman, Rachel, the love of his entire life, is not in that cave. She is buried by the side of a road near Bethlehem, where he lost her. He could have asked to lie there. Any of us would have expected him to ask to lie there. Instead, with some of his last breath on earth, he asks his sons to carry his body back to Canaan so he can lie down next to the wife he never chose. Decades stand between the wedding night that started all of this and that grave. And the woman who lived those decades in second place left behind 6 lessons for anyone who is tired of begging to be chosen. By a husband, by a parent, by anyone who keeps you close but never picks you first. She did not preach those lessons. She named her children be un, and the names tell everything. But to understand the grave, you have to start in the dark, in a tent, on a wedding night, where a bride is lying beside a man who thinks she is her sister. The wedding feast in Haran ran loud and late. Genesis says, Laban gathered all the men of the place and made a feast. And a feast in that world meant wine, poured freely, by a host who had every reason to keep the cups full. When the celebrating wound down, the bride was brought to the groom after dark, veiled, the way brides came to their weddings in that culture. The lamps were low or out. Jacob had waited 7 years for this exact night. He did not look closely. Why would he? He knew who he was marrying. Everyone in that town knew who Jacob was marrying. And Genesis chapter 29 gives us the morning in a single line. One of the most quietly devastating sentences in the whole Bible. In the morning, behold, it was Leah. Behold. The Hebrew word carries a jolt in it. The sound of a man propping himself up on one elbow as the early light comes through the tent wall, looking at the woman beside him, and feeling the floor of his life give way. Wrong sister. He had married the wrong sister. The right sister had been swapped out of his own wedding, and this one had been walked in under the veil, in the dark, by her own father. Every sermon ever preached on this passage stands where Jacob is standing. The deceived groom, the stolen wedding, the fury that sent him storming across the camp to grab Laban by the collar and demand, "What is this you have done to me?" Stand somewhere else for a minute. Stand inside the tent. Because there were 2 people who woke up in there. And whatever Leah knew or did not know when the veil went over her face, by morning she was the woman lying next to a man expecting someone else. She spent that night inside a wedding addressed to her sister. Every tender thing spoken in that tent, if tender things were spoken, belonged to Rachel. Leah was there for all of it. Silent, borrowed, wearing another woman's wedding. And then the light came up, slow and grey and then gold, the way it still comes up over that country. And there was nothing she could do but wait to be seen. What do you do with your face in a moment like that? In the half second before he turns over, do you pretend to sleep? Do you watch the tent wall brighten and count his breathing? The Bible does not tell us, and we are not going to invent it. The text gives Leah no words that morning, no tears, no trembling, nothing. What it gives us is worse. It gives us silence, and a man's shout carrying across the camp, and a bride left sitting in the wreckage of a wedding that was never hers. Jacob ran to Laban and demanded an answer. Laban gave him one, smooth as oil. It is not done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Notice something about that whole furious morning. Jacob got to ask his question. Laban got to give his answer. The two men talked, negotiated, struck a new deal before breakfast, and nobody in the story, not one person, asks Leah anything. Not how she is, not what she knew, not what this cost her. They never will. Genesis records the words of everyone around her that morning and gives her none, which is why her answers ended up somewhere nobody expected. She wrote them, one at a time, into the names of her sons. We will read every one of them before this story is over. But first, you need to know how she got into that tent. Because the wedding was not the beginning. The comparison started years earlier, in her father's house. And it started with a single verse that has followed Leah for 3,000 years. Genesis introduces the two daughters of Laban with one sentence each. And those two sentences have shaped how the world sees these sisters ever since. Now, Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Look at how uneven that is. Rachel gets two solid descriptions. Beautiful in form, beautiful in appearance. Her figure and her face. There is no ambiguity in it. No debate. 3,000 years of readers in every language have understood exactly what the text is saying. Rachel was the kind of beautiful that everyone agreed on. The kind that a stranger notices at a well within minutes of arriving in town. Which is, in fact, precisely what happened. Leah gets one word. In Hebrew, the word is rakot. And here is what most people never hear. Nobody is completely certain what it means. Some translations say, weak. Her eyes were weak, as if there was something wrong with them. Something dull or squinting or sickly. Other scholars read the same word as tender, delicate, soft. Some of the old rabbis took it as a compliment. Lovely eyes, gentle eyes, and argued the verse was giving each sister her own kind of beauty. The honest answer is that the word sits there on the page. One small word. And after 3,000 years, the experts are still not settled on it. So let us be careful, because there is a version of this story that gets told all the time. And it is lazy. And it is wrong. The ugly sister and the pretty sister. You have heard it. Maybe you have heard it from a pulpit. The Bible never says Leah was ugly. Not once. Not in any verse. Even the description of her is a question mark. What the text actually does is quieter and, if you have lived it, crueler. It does not insult Leah. It just looks past her. Rachel gets the full portrait. And Leah gets a single uncertain word about her eyes. And then the camera moves on. She is not mocked. She is barely seen. Her whole introduction to history is the sentence people rush through to get to her sister. And somebody watching this knows exactly what that feels like. Because you grew up in a version of that verse. You were the responsible one, and your sibling was the fun one. You were smart, and she was gorgeous. And everyone in the family used both words like they were being fair. You watched relatives light up at the door for someone else. You learned to walk into rooms half a step behind a person people were happier to see. Nobody ever called you less. They just looked at you second, every time. And a child does the math on that long before anyone says it out loud. That was the house Leah grew up in. A house of comparison, which leaves smaller bruises than a house of cruelty. In the exact same places. 2 girls. One town. And everybody in it quietly certain which daughter of Laban was the beautiful one. For years, that was just the shape of her life. Uncomfortable, maybe, but survivable. A private ranking inside one family in one small town in Mesopotamia. Then one afternoon, a stranger showed up at the well outside town. He was from the south, from Canaan. A relative on the run from a brother who wanted him dead. He was charming and desperate and strong enough to roll the stone off the well by himself. And within a month of his arrival, the private ranking inside Laban's house stopped being private, because the stranger fell in love on sight, and everyone in the household, the servants, the shepherds, the neighbors, her own father, and Leah herself, knew exactly which sister he was counting the years for. The stranger's name was Jacob, and he had come to Haran with nothing. That detail matters. In his father's country, he was a wealthy man's son, but he had fled with what he could carry. And a man with nothing had no bride price to offer. In that world, a groom paid for the right to marry. He paid in goods or he paid in service. And Jacob had nothing to pay with except his own 2 hands and his years. So when Laban asked him, "What shall your wages be?" Jacob had his answer ready. He had been in town a month. He had already seen everything he wanted. "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." 7 years. Feel the size of a number like that when a man says it out loud. 7 years of another man's fields, his flocks, his heat and his lambing seasons, offered all at once, unprompted, for one specific woman, and he named her carefully so there could be no confusion. Rachel, your younger daughter. It was a staggering offer, and it was a public one. A contract like that was not whispered. From that day forward, everyone attached to that household knew the deal. The hired men knew. The women at the well knew. It became the defining fact of that family. The way a long engagement becomes the defining fact of a family today. Laban's got that nephew from Canaan working for the little one. 7 years. Can you imagine? And then Genesis gives us one of the most beautiful sentences ever written about being in love. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. People put that verse on wedding programs. They engrave it on anniversary gifts. It deserves it. A man worked roughly 2,500 mornings in another man's fields, and the time collapsed like a folded letter because of who was waiting at the end of it. If you have ever loved someone that way, you know that verse is true. Time really does move differently when it is moving towards somebody. Now read it from 6 feet to the left. Because Leah lived inside those same 7 years, same camp, same tents, same table, roughly 2,500 mornings. And on every one of them, she woke up in a household that was openly, cheerfully counting down to her sister's wedding. She drew water from the well where he first saw Rachel. She sat at meals where the man could not keep his eyes on his food. Every festival, every family gathering, every ordinary day for 7 years carried the same background hum. He is here for her. Nobody was being cruel to Leah. That is the part worth sitting with. There was no villain in those 7 years. No one mocking her. No one measuring her out loud against her sister. There was just a great love story happening at close range. And she was not in it. She was the scenery it happened in front of. And you know this position. Somebody watching right now is living in it. You have stood in the group photo at your sister's engagement party, holding your glass, smiling on cue. You have been the co-worker at the table when the boss toasts someone else's year. You have sat in the passenger seat while your best friend gets noticed through the windshield. There is a particular kind of tired that comes from being close to a love, or a spotlight, or a celebration that is always pointed a few degrees away from you. It is not jealousy. Exactly. It is the slow wear of being permanently adjacent. That was Leah's address for 7 years. Adjacent, close enough to watch, never the one watched. And notice what the text never records in all that time. It never records Leah complaining. It never records her scheming or sulking or saying one bitter word. As far as Genesis is concerned, she endured those years in complete silence, which is either the silence of peace or the silence of a woman nobody thought to ask. Given what we saw on the wedding morning, you can guess which one. The 7 years ended. Jacob went to Laban and said, "Give me my wife, for my time is completed." The feast was arranged. The neighbors were invited. The wine was poured, and the man pouring it, the father of both daughters. He had spent those same 7 years doing his own quiet counting. Jacob had been watching Rachel. Laban had been watching Jacob. And what Laban saw was not a son-in-law. What Laban saw was the best worker he had ever had, with his contract about to expire. Everyone remembers the wedding trick. Almost nobody stops on the question underneath it. Here is the trick. Quickly, because the mechanics are simple. The feast, the darkness, the veil, the wine. At the hour when the bride was brought to the groom's tent, Laban took Leah, his older daughter, and walked her in under the veil instead of Rachel. Jacob, 7 years of waiting in his blood and a night of celebration in his head, did not discover the exchange until sunrise. When he confronted Laban, the old man shrugged out an excuse about local custom. The older daughter must marry first, and then, before the anger had even cooled, he offered a deal. Finish the bridal week with Leah, and I will give you Rachel too. For 7 more years of work. That is the trick. Now, here is the question underneath it. What kind of father does that to his own daughter? Because run the trade in plain terms, Laban had a daughter and he had a laborer, and he found a way to spend one to keep the other. He knew Jacob did not want Leah. That fact was 7 years old and public. Knowing it, he dressed her in wedding clothes anyway and delivered her, in the dark, to a man whose heart was set on somebody else. And he did it to lock another 7 years of Jacob's labor into his accounts. He used his daughter's body and her future as a tool to extend a contract. There is no reading of Genesis 29 where Laban is thinking about Leah's happiness. She was not a bride to him that night. She was leverage. So mark this down, because the whole story tilts on it. The first man who failed to choose Leah was not Jacob. It was her father, before the husband ever looked past her. The father had already priced her. Jacob at least had the excuse of loving someone else. Laban had no excuse at all. He simply saw more value in the worker than in the daughter, and he moved her across the board like a game piece. Now, what did Leah know? And when did she know it? Be honest here, because the text is honest here. Genesis does not say, it does not tell us whether she was informed that afternoon or that week, whether she begged her father not to do it, whether some part of her, after 7 adjacent years, agreed to it with her eyes open. Scripture leaves her role in the deception completely blank, and any teller who fills in that blank is writing fiction. What we know is the shape of the world she lived in. Daughters in that place and time did not overrule their fathers. Whatever she felt about the plan was never hers to stop. There is one more thread here, and it deserves a few seconds before we move on. Jacob knew this trick. Years earlier, in another tent, Jacob had dressed himself in his brother's clothes and stood in front of his own blind father. And when the old man asked, "Who are you?" "My son," Jacob had answered with his brother's name. He stole a blessing in the dark by pretending to be someone else. Now, a veil in the dark, a switched identity, a stolen night. And Jacob wakes up on the receiving end of his own signature move. The deceiver, deceived. The Bible does not preach about it. It just lays the two scenes a few chapters apart and lets you feel the symmetry. But this is not Jacob's story tonight. Come back to the woman in the veil, because before we go one step further into her marriage, something has to be said plainly. And it is the first of the 6 lessons this life is going to teach you. Being overlooked tells you everything about the people doing the looking, and nothing about your worth. Look at the 2 men who decided Leah's future that week. One of them never chose her because his eyes were full of Rachel. The other one handed her away because his eyes were full of 7 more years of labor. Neither man was looking at Leah. Neither verdict was about Leah. She got passed over, and the passing over was made entirely out of other people's blindness. Her father's greed and her husband's longing. 2 kinds of looking away that had nothing to do with what she was worth. And if you have ever been the one passed over, the child who came second, the spouse who feels like a roommate, the faithful one at work, watching promotions fly past, hear that lesson the way Leah's life teaches it. The people who overlooked you were staring at something else. Their verdict measured their eyesight. It never measured you. 1 week after the wedding morning, Laban kept his end of the bargain. There was a second feast, a second veille, and Jacob married Rachel. The text says it in 1 line and then adds the sentence that would govern the next 20 years of that family. And he loved Rachel more than Leah. So Leah began her marriage the way she would live most of it, in the same camp, under the same tents. 1 week, a wife. Then a wife alongside the wife he wanted, watching. What nobody in that camp knew yet was that someone else was watching too. Count the eyes in this story so far. It only takes a minute, and it will change how you read the next verse. Jacob's eyes. We know where those are. They found Rachel at a well on his first day in Haran, and they never really left her. 7 years of work could not tire them, and a stolen wedding could not redirect them. The text has just told us so in plain words. He loved Rachel more than Leah. Laban's eyes. Those are easy too. They are on the flocks, on the contract, on the years of labor he squeezed out of one man's love. When Laban looks at his daughters, he sees assets. He will prove it again years later. When both girls say bitterly that their father sold them and spent the money, the household's eyes on the drama, on the double wedding, on the great romance that finally got its ending. In every town, there is one story everybody follows. And in that town, the story was Jacob and Rachel. Now find one set of eyes in that entire camp resting on Leah. One person watching the woman who got married in a costume and unwrapped like a trick. Go through the verses. There is nobody. Her father used her. Her husband tolerates her. Her sister now shares her roof as a rival. And the story itself has been rushing past her since the day it introduced her with a single uncertain word. Then Genesis chapter 29, verse 31, and the sentence changes subjects. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb. Read that slowly, because after everything this woman has been through, the verse is doing something enormous with its first 4 words. When the Lord saw Leah, in a story where every human gaze slides past her, where she has not been asked one question or given one line of dialogue, the God of heaven is recorded looking directly at her. She is the object of the sentence. She is what he is watching. For the first time in her entire life, as far as the record shows, somebody's full attention is on Leah. And it is his. Now, about that word, hated, because it lands hard in English and it needs handling. The Hebrew word is senua. And in the way these texts use it, it does not require a husband snarling at his wife across the fire. It is comparison language, loved less, set second. The same word gets used in ancient law codes for the wife who ranks behind another wife. Jacob did not have to be cruel to Leah for this verse to be true. And nothing in Genesis shows him being cruel to her. He just loved Rachel more. Openly. Daily. In a 2-room marriage where the rooms were side by side, and when love is being measured out unevenly at that closer range, the one receiving less does not experience it as less. She experiences it as the door closing every single evening. The text calls it what it felt like from inside her chest. Hated. So heaven looked at the unloved wife, and heaven did something about it. He opened her womb. And the same verse adds, with terrible economy. But Rachel was barren. We will come back to Rachel's side of that sentence. And when we do, we will handle it gently, because there is real pain on that side too. For now, stay with what has just happened to Leah. The woman nobody watched has been seen. The woman nobody asked has been answered. And the answer arrived in the one form that her world counted as glory for a wife. A child, a son. As it turned out, in her culture, in her century, there was no louder statement of a woman's worth. 9 months later, Leah was holding her firstborn. And this is where her story stops being something done to her and starts being something she says, because in that world, mothers named their children, and the names meant things. And Genesis is about to do something it does for almost no one else in its pages. 4 times in a row, it is going to record the exact words this woman spoke over a newborn. 4 names, 4 sentences, straight from her mouth to the page. The silent bride is about to become the most quoted mother in the book. She looked at her first son, and she gave him his name. And the name was not really a name. It was a message, addressed to a man who was not in the room. The boy's name was Reuben, and in Hebrew it sounds like a shout. Look, Asson, look, see, behold, Ben, Asson, as if the name itself were grabbing somebody by the sleeve and turning them around. Look Look at what I have. Look at what I made. And if the name alone left any doubt about who was supposed to do the looking, Leah's own words at the birth remove it. Because Genesis wrote them down. Because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. Stop there. Do not rush past this sentence, because it might be the most honest sentence any human being speaks in the book of Genesis. And it comes in two halves that do not belong together. The first half is faith, and it is real faith. The Lord has looked upon my affliction. She got it. She understood what had happened to her. Not luck, not biology, but the God of her husband's fathers noticing an unloved woman in a tent in Haran. Nobody taught her that theology. There was no scripture yet. No synagogue, no psalm to quote. She simply held her son and knew, correctly, that heaven had seen her misery and responded to it. Everything true in this story. She said first. Then the second half comes out of her mouth in the same breath. For now, my husband will love me. There it is. She took the gift and aimed it. God saw me. And now Jacob will see me. Heaven's attention. Converted on arrival into a strategy for winning a man's attention. She was handed proof of her worth from the highest possible source. And her first move was to spend that proof on the one person in the camp who kept refusing to sign off on it. The verse reads like a woman standing in the rain of everything she ever asked for, holding out a cup to catch some for somebody else. And before one word of judgment forms about her, look around your own life. Look in your own hands. Because you have made this exact trade, somebody watching tonight built a whole career out of it. You got the degree. And the first thought was not satisfaction. It was, maybe now my father will say, he is proud of me. You lost the weight, hit the number, and stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing how he would finally look at you. You bought the house, made the team, published the thing, raised remarkable kids, and every achievement, the moment it landed in your hands, got converted into currency and slid across the table toward someone who was not even looking at you. The wife who learns his favorite meals and keeps the house like a magazine. Waiting. The employee who works the weekends nobody sees. Waiting. The grown child who still calls home with good news first. Every time. Waiting. There is a phrase for the engine inside all of it. And Leah just gave it to us. 2 words. Now. And then a hope. For now, he will love me. Maybe now. Hold on to those 2 words. Because they are going to follow this woman for the rest of her story. And if we are honest, they have been following some of us for most of ours. Maybe now they will love me. Maybe now they will notice. Maybe now I have finally done enough to be chosen. Whole decades of human lives get spent inside those 2 words. One delivery after another. Each one carried to the same door. So Reuben was born, and the message was sent. A firstborn son. The single most valuable thing a wife in that world could place in her husband's hands. Delivered and named and pointed straight at Jacob's heart. Look, Asson, now you will love me. And now search the text for Jacob's response. There is none. Genesis records no reaction from Jacob to the birth of his firstborn child. No celebration. No word to Leah. Not one syllable. The text that carefully preserved every word Leah spoke goes completely silent on her husband. And the silence sits on the page exactly the way it must have sat in her tent. The next thing the scripture says is that she conceived again. The second son came, and Leah named him too. And the second name is a record of what the first name failed to do. She called him Simeon, from the Hebrew word shama, to hear. And once again, Genesis preserves her exact words, her second diary entry, spoken over a newborn. Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. Set the two entries side by side, because something has shifted between them, and something has not. At Reuben, God saw. At Simeon, God heard. Seen, then heard. Whatever else is true about this woman, her grasp of what heaven was doing kept growing sharper. Sight is one kind of attention. Hearing is closer. Hearing means something got spoken, or cried, or muttered into the dark, and did not go unwitnessed. The text never shows us Leah praying, and we will not write the scene for it. But the name of her second son carries her own testimony that something in her reached God's hearing. And you do not name a child after being heard, unless being heard is the miracle you are living in. That is what shifted. Now look at what did not. The Lord has heard that I am hated. 2 sons into her marriage. And listen to how she still locates herself on the map. I am hated. Still measuring her position by her distance from Jacob. Still using his heart as the compass. God's hearing did not get received as a new address to live at. It got received as sympathy for the old one. Heaven is agreeing with me about my situation, she says. In effect, heaven has confirmed the injustice, and she carries the confirmation right back into the same room, sets it on the same shelf, and keeps waiting for the same man. The first time, the gift became a strategy. Now he will love me. This time, there is not even a strategy left. There is just a wound with a witness. And here is the hard truth sitting inside this short chapter. The one this second name exists to teach. Being heard is not the same as being healed. There is a distance between the two. A long, flat, quiet distance. And it is entirely possible to pitch your tent inside it and live there for years. You may be living there now. You said the thing out loud. Finally, to a counselor, to a pastor, to a best friend across a kitchen table. And they heard you. They believed you. They said the words you had waited a decade for somebody to say. That was wrong. That should not have happened to you. You deserved better. And it mattered. It genuinely mattered. And then you drove home to the same house. The same silence. The same person looking past you. And you discovered what Leah discovered between her first son and her second. Acknowledgement is water in the desert. But it is not the way out of the desert. The pain now has a witness. The pain is still the pain. So the record stands. 2 sons, 2 names. God has seen me. God has heard me. And in the space between those 2 sentences, no record that Jacob said anything at all. The most important man in her world remains. On the page. Perfectly silent. She conceived a 3rd time. And if the first name was a message, and the second name was a testimony, the 3rd name is something harder to listen to. The 3rd name is the sound of a woman raising her offer. There is a number hiding inside Leah's 3rd delivery, and the number is the saddest thing in the room. The boy was named Levi, from the Hebrew lava, to be attached, to be joined, and here is what his mother said over him. Word for word. The 3rd entry in the diary. Now this time my husband will be attached to me, Because I have borne him 3 sons. Because I have borne him 3 sons. She is counting. Do you hear it? Somewhere in that tent in Haran, a running tally is being kept. And she just read the total out loud. 3. As if love were a scale that had so far refused to tip. And the only problem she can imagine, is that the weight on her side is still not heavy enough. 1 son did not move him. 2 sons did not move him. Surely. 3. Feel the weight of what 3 sons meant in her world. Because otherwise, this verse slips past too easily. A son in that culture was security, inheritance, lavor, legacy, a family's future walking around on small feet. Sons were how a man's name survived him. Sons were how a household grew wealthy and how parents were protected in old age. A wife who bore 3 healthy sons had given her husband, by every measurement, her civilization possessed. The greatest fortune a woman could give. Rachel, the loved one, the chosen one, had at this point given him none. Leah was not losing. The only contest her world knew how to score. She was winning it. 3-0. And it was not working. Look at the verbs across the 3 names. Because they are sliding downhill. At Reuben she said, "My husband will love me." Love. The whole word. The whole hope. The thing itself. By Levi she says, "My husband will be attached to me." Attached. Joined. Connected to. That is not the language of romance. That is the language of proximity. Somewhere between the first birth and the third. Without ever announcing it, she marked the price down. She stopped negotiating for his heart and started negotiating for his presence. Just be attached to me. Just be joined to this family I keep building for you. Just stay in the room. If you have never lived it, that markdown might sound like progress, like realism, like a woman adjusting her expectations. If you have lived it, you know exactly what it is. It is what hope does when it is starving. It shrinks its requests to fit what it thinks it can get. First, you wanted to be loved. Then, you wanted to be wanted. Then, you would settle for being needed. Then, for being useful. Then, for being kept. Every rung down that ladder feels sensible at the time. And one day you look up and cannot see the thing you originally asked for. Leah started at love. 3 sons later she is bidding on attachment. Maybe now. There it is again. Hiding in plain sight at the front of the verse. Now this time, 3rd delivery. The 3rd message carried to the same door. And once again, the text records no response from Jacob. Not to the 1st son. Not to the 2nd. Not now to the 3rd. 3 of the 12 tribes of Israel have just been born in that tent. And their father, on the page, has not said one word. So say the 2nd lesson out loud here. In this room, over this name. Because this is where Leah's life has finished proving it. You cannot make a person choose you by becoming more useful to them. It has never worked. Not once. In the entire history of the human heart. Usefulness is real. And usefulness gets you real things. It gets you gratitude. Sometimes, it gets you dependence. Often, it gets you kept around. Almost always. Because people rarely dismiss what serves them. But being chosen lives in a different country. One your performance cannot reach. And it does not respond to production. 3 sons, and he did not love her. 30 would not have done it either. The account she kept paying into was never going to pay out. Because it was never about the balance. It was never about her at all. His heart had an occupant. No delivery of hers, however heavy, was going to change the name on that door. And somebody hearing this needs to sit with that for a second. Because you are still making payments. Still over-functioning in a marriage that stays cold. Still earning at a job that will not say your name in the big meetings. Still showing up for a parent who saves the warmth for your sibling. Adding weight to your side of the scale. Year after year. Certain the tipping point is one more sacrifice away. Leah is 3 sons deep in that arithmetic. And the scale has not moved a hair. Which is what makes her 4th delivery the hinge of this entire story. Because the 4th time, something happens that no one in that camp saw coming. And it does not happen to Jacob. It happens in her. The 4th name breaks the pattern. The 4th name is the reason this story is in the Bible. Genesis chapter 29, verse 35. Leah conceived a 4th time, and bore a 4th son. And before you hear what she said over this one, you need to hear the first 3 again. In order, the way the text lines them up. Read them like diary entries. Because that is what they are. At Reuben, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction. For now my husband will love me. At Simeon, because the Lord has heard that I am hated. At Levi, now this time my husband will be attached to me. Because I have borne him 3 sons. My husband will love me. I am hated. My husband will be attached to me. 3 names, and the same man standing in the middle of every one of them. Even the entry about being heard by God is really about her position in Jacob's heart. For 3 straight births, whatever the sentence starts with, it bends toward him before it ends. He is the gravity of her grammar. Every word she says orbits a man who is not in the room. Now the 4th son. Here is the entire birth announcement, exactly as she gave it. This time I will praise the Lord. That is all of it. Read it again and notice what is missing. Because what is missing is the whole event. There is no husband in the sentence. No love me. No attached to me. No hated. No, because I have borne him anything. She is not counting sons anymore. She is not filing a claim. She is not addressing a message to the man across the camp or reading her worth off his face. For the first time in 4 births, for the first time in her recorded life, Leah says a sentence that has no Jacob in it, just her and God and praise. And she named the boy Judah, which is built from the Hebrew word for praise itself. The first 3 names looked sideways. Look, Issachar, God has heard. My husband will join me. This name looks straight up. She put the word praise on a human being and sent him into the world carrying it. Then the text adds 4 words, quiet as a door clicking shut. Then she ceased bearing. She stopped. After 4 sons, one after another. The deliveries end. Right here. Right at this name. And the placement is hard to ignore. The strategy had been children. Children were the messages, the payments, the weights on the scale. And the very verse where she stops aiming the children at Jacob is the verse where the children stop. As if something that had been driving that engine finally let off the pedal. As if some part of her, at least for this one morning, it was no longer producing evidence for a judge who never showed up to court. Now, be very careful right here, because this is the moment where 100 sermons reach for a word the text never uses. And we are not going to reach with them. The word is healed. Nothing in Genesis says Leah was healed. Nothing says she woke up free, that the ache for Jacob dissolved, that she never again measured herself in his eyes. The verse gives us one sentence and one silence. And the honest reading is exactly that size. For one recorded moment, holding one particular child, this woman's attention came off the man who refused to choose her and went up. Whether it stayed up, the verse does not promise. It just shows us that it happened. After years of maybe now, aimed at a closed door. One morning, the door was not in the sentence anymore. If you have ever had a morning like that, you know it does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives quietly, mid-task, mid-life. The first Saturday, you did not check whether they had called. The holiday you enjoyed before, remembering you were supposed to be sad. The compliment you accepted whole, without forwarding it in your head to the person whose approval used to run your whole economy. One sentence of your inner life. Suddenly, with their name missing from it, it feels like almost nothing. It is everything. It is the first ground you have stood on in years that they do not own. That was Judah. One sentence with the door missing. One name aimed at heaven instead of down the hall. And hold that name. By the way, hold it apart from all the others. Because out of everything in this story, every person, every scheme, every tear shed in that camp in Haran, this name is the one going somewhere. You will see it again before we are done. And where you see it will take your breath. So there is the summit. If this were a sermon, this is where it would end. The unloved wife looks away from her husband at last, lifts her eyes, learns her worth. Roll the music. Clean, complete, and finished. This is not a sermon. This is Genesis. And Genesis tells the truth about people. Jacob does not stay gone. We have been standing in one tent for 4 chapters. Walk across the camp with me now, because there is another woman in this family, and it is time to be fair to her. Rachel had everything Leah wanted. Start there, because it is simply true. She had the love story. She had the man who worked 14 years and called them a few days. She had the face that started it all at the well. The wedding that was supposed to happen. The heart that never wavered off her through every trick her father pulled. Every night, in a camp with 2 wives, Jacob's love pointed one direction, and it pointed at her. Whatever being chosen looks like, Rachel was standing in it, and Genesis chapter 30 opens with this woman coming apart. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. Then she went to Jacob, the man who adored her, and said the most desperate sentence she ever says in Scripture, "Give me children, or I shall die, or I shall die." That is the chosen woman talking, the one with the love, and she is telling the man who chose her that his love is not enough to keep her alive. Because while Leah was delivering sons in the next tent, one after another, Rachel's arms stayed empty. In her world, remember, children were worth security, legacy, a woman's public standing, all of it. Every birth next door was a celebration she had to hear through the tent wall. Every name Leah announced, and the names carried, was a verdict. Rachel felt land on her own body. The camp was watching her too, and in the only column her culture kept score in, the beloved wife had nothing. Jacob's answer did not help. He got angry. The text says, and snapped at the woman he loved. Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb, even the great love of Genesis? It turns out, gets tired and says the wrong thing at the worst time. Now stand back from this family and look at what has actually been built here. Because the picture, once you see it whole, will not leave you. 2 sisters, 2 tents. In one tent, a woman with 4 sons and no love, lying awake, wanting the one thing her sister has. In the other tent, a woman with all the love and no children, lying awake, wanting the one thing her sister has. Each of them staring across the same few yards of ground at the other one's life, absolutely certain that the missing piece, the piece that would finally quiet the ache, is the piece the other woman is holding. And neither of them can see what the audience can see, which is that the other tent hurts too. Leah looks at Rachel and sees the chosen one, the safe one, the one who never had to earn a single glance. She cannot see a woman rehearsing, "Give me children, or I shall die," into the dark. Rachel looks at Leah and sees riches. Fourson, a full tent, a fortress of legacy. She cannot see a mother naming babies like messages in bottles, thrown toward a man who never wrote back. Each sister has built her picture of the other out of exactly one detail, the detail she herself is starving for, and the picture is wrong in both directions. Here is the third lesson, and it cuts both ways at once. Comparison takes another person's advantage and turns it into evidence against your own worth. That is the whole machine. It finds the one thing they have and you lack, blows it up to fill the entire frame, and then reads your missing piece as the verdict on your value. And while that machine is running in you, hear this clearly, it may be running in the other direction too. Somebody has stood in your life the way Leah stood outside Rachel's tent, counting your blessings for you, aching. The co-worker whose marriage you envy may envy the freedom you cry about. The friend whose children you grieve for may grieve for your quiet house. Rachel would have traded for Leah's tent. Leah would have traded for Rachel's. Both women stood starving in front of the other one's feast. And neither feast, if they could have swapped, would have fed the actual hunger. Because the hunger in both tents was never really about sons or about Jacob. It was about being enough. And no trade supplies that. Nobody in that camp said any of this out loud. Nobody sat those sisters down. Instead, the envy hardened into resolve. And the resolve went shopping for weapons, because Rachel, refused by her own body and stung by her husband's anger, looked around the camp and found a way to get children without bearing them. There was a custom for it, an old and legal and miserable custom, and the moment she reached for it, this family stopped being 2 women in pain. It became a war. And a household at war needs what every war needs. It needs a way to keep score. The custom worked like this. A wife who could not bear children could give her personal servant to her husband, and any child born of that arrangement would be counted as the wife's child. Legal in that world, documented in the ancient contracts of that era. Sarah had done it with Hagar in this same family's history, and it had filled the family with grief. And everybody in this story knew that history. Rachel reached for it anyway. "Here is my servant Bilhah. Go in to her, so that she may give birth on my knees, and even I may have children through her." Listen to the ache at the end of that sentence. Even I may have children. That is not a strategy talking. That is a woman scraping the bottom of her options. So Bilhah conceived, and bore Jacob a son. And now watch what has happened to the naming, because the names are where this family keeps its truth. Leah's first 4 names were prayers and diary entries. Rachel's names come out swinging. She called the first boy Dan, and said, God has judged me. Judged, vindicated. The name of a courtroom victory. She called the second boy Naphtali, and gave the reason in words you can almost hear through gritted teeth. With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and have prevailed. I have wrestled with my sister and won. She said that over a baby, a newborn, minutes old. And the sentence spoken across his little body is a battle report. Nobody in this family is pretending anymore. The children have become the score, and the mothers are announcing the score at every birth. And Leah, 4 son up, mother of most of the family. The winner, by any count, the culture kept. Leah looked at what Rachel had done, and matched it. Sit with that for a second, because it may be the most revealing move in the whole chapter. Leah did not need more sons. She had 4. She had Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, a dynasty in one tent. She had stood one shining morning in a sentence with no Jacob in it, a woman looking up instead of sideways. And when her sister put a servant into the game, that woman, that same woman, took her own servant Zilpah by the hand and sent her to Jacob's tent. She was not short on children. She was losing ground. The scoreboard had started running again. And a scoreboard does not care what you learned last spring. It only cares what you posted this season. Zilpah Boreason. Leah named him Gad, a name that carries the sense of fortune. A lucky strike. Troops arriving. Zilpah bore another. Leah named him Asher, happy, blessed. And her words at the birth tell you exactly which audience she was playing to now. Happy am I, for women will call me happy. The women, public opinion. The camp, the neighbors, the watching eyes. 4 names ago, she was talking to God. Now she is talking to the crowd. Count the tally with me, because the family was certainly counting. Leah, 4 sons of her own. Bilhah for Rachel, 2. Zilpah for Leah, 2. 8 boys in that camp. And climbing, and every single one of them born into a job. Each one arrived as a point for his mother's side, was named like a point, and would grow up learning which side of the yard he scored for. Now, before anybody writes these 2 women off as crazy or petty, put the scene in its real world for a moment. This was an age with no bank accounts, no pension, no legal standing for a woman apart from her household. Sons were a wife's security when her husband died, her advocates at the gate, her food in old age. Fertility was economics, inheritance, survival. When these sisters fought over births, they were not squabbling over trophies. They were fighting over their futures with the only weapons their world had issued them. Understand that, and hold it. And then notice that understanding the stakes does not make the sight of it any less heartbreaking. Because whatever the stakes were, here is what the fight had actually produced. A household where babies were ammunition, where 2 sisters who slept a few tents apart spoke to each other through birth announcements, where a good and ancient thing, the arrival of a child, had been bent into a move. That is what an untreated wound does inside a family. It refuses to stay in the person who took the hit. Pain that never gets healed starts recruiting. It pulls in the husband, who now shuttles between tents in a rotation. Everyone silently tracks. It pulls in two servant women, Bilhah and Zilpah, who were handed to a man as game pieces and are never once asked a question in the entire story. It pulls in the children, every one of them fluent, before they could talk, in the geography of their mother's resentments, one woman's unhealed rejection, one woman's unhealed emptiness. And now 11 people are living inside the blast radius, most of them born there. And just when it seems the contest has nowhere lower to go, it goes somewhere no one would invent. Because one afternoon in wheat harvest, a small boy comes walking in from the fields with his hands full of flowers. And the flowers set off a negotiation that tells you more about this family in 10 verses than everything you have heard so far. The small boy is Reuben. Maybe now he will love me. That Reuben, and what happens to the flowers he picked for his mother, is where we go next. It was the time of wheat harvest, early summer in that country, and Reuben was out in the fields. Picture him, because the text invites you to Leah's firstborn, still a small boy, old enough to wander the field edges while the adults worked, young enough to still bring treasures home to his mother. And what he found that day, growing low in some corner of a field, were mandrakes, a strange little plant with a forked root and small fragrant fruit. And around that plant, in that world, hung a reputation. People called them love apples. Folk wisdom across the ancient Near East held that mandrakes stirred love and helped a barren woman conceive. Whether they did anything at all is beside the point. What matters is what everybody believed they did. And a small boy does not know any of that. He just knows he found something interesting. And he carried it in from the field, the way little boys have carried things to their mothers forever. Here, Mama, I found these. Rachel saw them. And Rachel, childless Rachel, aching Rachel, who had already tried prayer and tried anger and tried her servant, looked at those roots in a child's hands and saw one more door to knock on. She asked her sister, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." And years of held breath came out of Leah in one sentence. "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Must you take away my son's mandrakes also? You have taken away my husband. There it is. At last. Out loud. This is the first recorded conversation between these two women in the entire story. The first time the text lets us hear them speak to each other. And this is what it sounds like. An accusation. Sister to sister. Years in the making. As far as Leah is concerned, she is not being asked for flowers. She is being asked for one more thing by the woman who already holds the only thing that ever mattered. Now listen to Rachel's answer, because it changes the scene from an argument into a transaction. "Then he may lie with you tonight, in exchange for your son's mandrakes." Read that again slowly. One sister has the husband's love. The other sister has the flowers. And standing in the middle of a camp in broad daylight, they strike a deal. A night with Jacob for a handful of mandrakes. The man is not present. The man is not consulted. His evening is simply traded between his wives like a market good. And the price is a root, a small boy pulled out of a field. And Leah pays it. She takes the deal. And then Genesis gives us a verse that is almost unbearable to watch. If you actually watch it. In the evening, when Jacob came in from the field, Leah went out to meet him. She went out to meet him. She did not wait in her tent for the arrangement to be relayed. She walked out, down the path, toward her own husband coming home from work, to tell him where he would be sleeping tonight and why. And here are her exact words. "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." I have hired you. The Hebrew underneath that phrase is the plain word for wages, for hiring a worker. It is the same commercial language that runs through this whole family story. And Leah puts it in her own mouth, to her own husband. On the road, in the evening light, years a wife, mother of 4 of his sons, and the only way she can get an evening of his presence is to purchase it from her sister and inform him of the price. The text does not tell us how Jacob felt walking that last stretch home. It does not tell us what Leah's face did while she waited on the path, or what it cost a woman to rehearse that sentence. We are not going to invent any of it. The scene is devastating enough, standing exactly as written. A wife hiring her husband, a marriage that has come to this. And here is the 4th lesson, and the mandrakes wrote it before anyone could say it. Bargaining can buy you access to a person. It cannot buy you the person. The deal worked. Understand. That is the sharpest edge of this scene. The negotiation succeeded completely. Jacob came to her tent that night. His body was present. The evening was hers. The contract was honored down to the letter, and the thing she had actually been paying for, through 4 sons and all those years and now a fistful of flowers, was exactly as far away as it had always been. She won the night. Being chosen was never on the table. Some of you have won that night. You know precisely how it tastes. You got the visit you guilted them into, and sat across the table from a person whose calendar you had captured and whose heart was somewhere else. You kept the marriage together with logistics and pressure, and you sleep every night next to proof that presence and choice are 2 different things. You got the text back, the meeting, the holiday appearance, the arrangement, access, secured, and you found out what Leah found out on that harvest evening, that there is almost nothing lonelier than getting the person in the room and feeling how completely they are not there. That was the transaction. 2 sisters. One evening, flowers for a husband, as low and as human as the whole story gets. But Genesis adds one more line to this scene, and the line changes everything about how it ends. Because while those 2 women were trading a man between them, somebody else was listening to that camp, and God heard Leah. What he did about it, nobody in that family was bargaining for. God listened to Leah. The text says, "And she conceived, and bore Jacob a 5th son." Stop on that first phrase before anything else. God listened to Leah. The night began as a purchase, arranged by 2 sisters over a handful of flowers. And heaven's response to that whole embarrassing transaction was not to turn away from it. It was to hear the woman inside it. Underneath the bargaining, underneath the hired evening, there was still a person crying out for something. And the God who had seen her and heard her at the beginning of this story was apparently still listening at the bottom of it. That is worth keeping, because it means the low chapters of a life are not off the record. She was heard in her worst scene. 2. Then came the naming, and by now you know that the names in this family are where the truth lives. So listen to what Leah said over her 5th son. "God has given me my wages, because I gave my servant to my husband." And she called his name Issachar, wages, The name Issachar is built on the Hebrew word sakar, hire, payment, reward. It is the exact same word she used on the road that evening. I have hired you. She heard herself say it to Jacob's face. And then she reached for the same word again and fastened it onto a child. Permanently. There is a man in the 12 tribes of Israel whose name, every time it was ever called across a field or written in a record, said wages. And once you see that word clearly, look up, because it has been running through this family since the very first chapter, like a watermark on every page. Jacob wanted a wife, and the wife came priced. 7 years of labor. Terms negotiated with her father like a hiring contract. And then 7 more when the goods were switched. Laban gave away his daughters. And years later, both of those daughters will say the same bitter sentence about it. Our father sold us and has been devouring our money. The sisters wanted standing, and standing was counted out in sons. Each birth posted to an account. A little boy picked flowers, and the flowers became currency. A husband's evening was bought with them, at a negotiated rate. And now the language of the ledger has reached the cradle itself. And a baby is named payment. One family, and every bond in it. Father to daughter, husband to wife, sister to sister, and now mother to son, has passed through the vocabulary of the marketplace. Nobody in that camp decided this. No one woke up one morning and announced that from now on, this household will conduct its love in units of labor and livestock and childbirth. It crept in, deal by deal, the way it always creeps in. Laban priced his daughters, so the daughters learned to price their standing. So the standing got priced in sons. And by the time we reach Issachar, there is not one relationship left in the story that has not been touched by an invoice. That is the quiet horror of this chapter. These people were ordinary, and the accounting was contagious. And it is still contagious. Some of you grew up in a version of that camp, a house where affection was payroll, disbursed on report card day and performance day and not otherwise, where you learned the exchange rate early. An A brings warmth. A trophy brings attention. A failure brings the cold. And you have carried that price sheet into every relationship since. Some of you are running the ledger right now from the other side, measuring out warmth to a child or a spouse in proportion to what they produced this week, because it is the only currency your house ever traded in. Families pass down more than eye color. They pass down economies. Laban's economy got into his daughters, and his daughter's economy got into those 12 boys. And nobody in the story ever sat down and chose it. There is one more thing to notice in Leah's words, and it is the strangest thing in the verse. God has given me my wages, because I gave my servant to my husband. She reads the son as payment for the Zilpah arrangement. Look at the theology tangled up in that sentence. She knows it is God who gives. Her instinct for where children come from has been right since Reuben, and she still cannot imagine the gift arriving without an invoice attached. So she supplies one. He gave, therefore I must have paid. Even grace, in this family's grammar, has to be somebody's wages. She bore a 6th son after that, and what she said over the 6th one is the reason this act of the story exists. Because at the 6th name, the diary entry we have all been waiting on finally shows up. The one that tells us whether the woman from Judah's birth, the woman who once said a whole sentence with no Jacob in it, is still in there. She is, and she is not. And the honest answer to that question is the most valuable thing Leah will ever teach you. The sixth son was born, and Leah stood in that familiar room one more time, a newborn in her arms and a name on her lips. Here is the last diary entry, complete, word for word. God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons. And she called his name Zebulun. Read it next to Judah. Put the 2 announcements side by side, years apart, and let yourself feel the distance between them. At Judah, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Full stop. No husband anywhere in the sentence. We stood in that verse together and watched a woman look up instead of sideways for the first time in her life. And we were careful, if you remember, not to call it healing, because the text did not call it that. The text just showed us one clean sentence and let us hope. Now the hope gets its answer. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons. He is back. Jacob has walked back into her grammar. The counting is back. 6 sons. The tally updated and read aloud like it was at Levi. The little word now is back. That maybe now, the hinge her whole life used to swing on, oiled and swinging again. Years after the morning, she stood in a sentence without him. Here is Leah at the foot of the same old hill, holding out the same old hope to the same closed door. And one thing has changed. And the change is quiet and terrible. Listen to the verb. She does not say, "Love me." She does not say, "Be attached to me." She says, "Honor me." The Hebrew carries the sense of dwelling with, recognizing, giving a wife her rightful place. Track that word across her whole life, because it has been sliding the entire time. At Reuben, she asked for love, the whole thing, the thing itself. At Levi, she asked for attachment. Just be joined to me. Just stay. And now, 6 sons and half a lifetime in, she asks to be honored, acknowledged, given standing, somewhere across those years, without one announcement. Love went off the menu. She is bidding on his respect now, and offering 6 sons for it. And the ladder her hope has climbed down, rung by rung by rung. Love, then attachment, then acknowledgement, is the saddest staircase in the book of Genesis. So what do we do with this? What do we do with Judah? If Zebulun is coming, was the summit fake? Was that shining sentence, "This time I will praise the Lord," just a good day wearing the costume of a breakthrough? No. And settling that question is the 5th lesson, the one almost nobody will tell you, because it complicates every clean story ever sold to you about getting over things. Healing does not move in a straight line. Judah was real. That morning was real. The lifted eyes were real. The sentence, without his name in it, happened, and it mattered, and nothing that came after unhappened it. And the old ache came back anyway, wearing new words, asking for a smaller thing in the same old direction. Both of those are true at once. And they were true in the same woman. And the Bible put both of them on the page a few verses apart without flinching. Because the Bible tells the truth about people. You know this terrain if you have walked any of it. You had your Judah morning, the day you finally let go of them, and meant it. The season you stopped auditioning for your father, stopped checking the phone, stopped running every choice through the courtroom of what they would think. And it was real. And the ground held. And you thought, so, this is what free feels like. And then, months later, a year later, you caught yourself composing the message you swore you were done composing, rehearsing the accomplishment in the exact shape of their approval, standing at the foot of the same hill with the same offering, one more time, and the shame rolled in behind the discovery. Because if it came back, then the breakthrough must have been a lie, and you must be broken in some way that mornings cannot fix. Leah is in the text to tell you the shame is wrong. The relapse does not erase the breakthrough. It never did. A heart is not a door that swings shut once and locks. It is more like tide ground, and the old water comes back over it some nights. And the coming back is not failure. It is the ordinary weather of being a person. What you learned on the summit stays learned, even on the mornings you wake up at the bottom. The direction of a life is not read off its worst recent day. Judah still happened. Zebulun does not get a vote about that. And quietly, in the space between those two names, notice what Leah never did. She never went back to zero. Even Zebulun's announcement opens with "God has endowed me." Gift language, grace language, before the old hope hijacks the second half. The woman who once could not say a sentence without Jacob in it now says sentences that start with God and bend toward Jacob. It is not freedom. It is not the old prison either. It is a person. Midway, which is where most of us actually live. After Zebulun, Leah bore one more child, a daughter this time, and named her Dinah. And the text gives us no announcement at all. No diary entry, just the name. The record of Leah's spoken hopes ends at Zebulun, at "honor me," at a door that never opened. And then something strange happens to Leah in the book of Genesis. She starts to disappear. For 6 chapters of Genesis, we have lived inside Leah's voice. 8 birth announcements, her exact words, preserved across 3,000 years. Seen, heard, attached, praise, wages, honor. No other woman in the book gets her inner life recorded at that length. For 6 chapters, whenever Leah spoke, the text leaned in and wrote it down. And then the text stops leaning in. After Dinah's birth, the camera swings away from her tent, and it does not swing back. The story has bigger events to chase now, and it chases them. Jacob finally breaks free of Laban, and there is a tense midnight departure. Flocks and children loaded up, a father-in-law in pursuit. Jacob wrestles a stranger through the dark at the Jabbok River and limps away with a new name, Israel. There is the long-dreaded reunion with Esau. 400 men on the horizon, and a night of terror before an embrace nobody expected. There is tragedy at Shechem involving Dinah, and the terrible thing her brothers did about it. And then Joseph arrives at the center of the book. Rachel's boy, the dreamer, and the final third of Genesis belongs almost entirely to him. Leah is present for every bit of it. Hold on to that. She packed her 7 children in the night flight from Haran. She forded the Jabbok with the family while her husband stayed behind to wrestle. She stood in the reunion procession before Esau, her children beside her. She was Dinah's mother through the horror at Shechem. And no one who has read that chapter can imagine she slept through it. Decades of a woman's life are in these pages. She is in the camp, at the fires, on the roads, raising half the tribes of Israel. She just never speaks again. Not one recorded word. The woman whose sentences we could quote by heart goes silent on the page. And the silence runs for chapter after chapter, straight through to the end of her life. The text even records her death only in passing, years after the fact. In a single backward glance we will come to soon. No deathbed scene, no final words. The most quoted mother in Genesis exits the book without a farewell. And the question that silence leaves behind is the question this whole story has been carrying since the wedding morning. Did Jacob ever love her? In all those decades, through everything they survived together. The flight and the river and Esau and Shechem and famine. Did the door ever open? Did the man ever turn? Some ordinary evening in Canaan. And finally, see the woman who had built most of his house. Here is the honest answer. And it is the only answer this video will give you. Because it is the only one the Bible gives. The text does not say, there is no reconciliation scene in Genesis. No verse where Jacob takes Leah's hand. No sentence anywhere that says he came to love her. Scripture, which recorded her longing in such fine detail, entry by entry, name by name, declines to record whether the longing was ever answered. The question the whole first half of her story taught us to ask is a question the second half simply refuses to address. And every storyteller who has ever handled this material has felt the temptation right here. You can feel it too. Probably the itch to write the missing scene. Some quiet evening late in their marriage. Rachel gone, the children grown, two old people by a fire. And Jacob finally says the thing. Films would shoot that scene. Novels have written it. Half the sermons on Leah imply it. And we are not going to do it. Because the scene does not exist. And inventing it would betray the woman. This story is about, she lived without that scene. The least the telling of her life can do is not paste one in. So sit in the silence with her for a moment. Because the silence itself has something to say. And it may be for somebody watching right now. Some questions do not get answered in this life. Some people wait decades for a word that is never spoken. An acknowledgement that never comes. A door that never opens. And the story just goes on. The years fill up with other things. Children and moves and funerals and ordinary Tuesdays. And the unanswered question does not resolve. It just gets quieter. If that is your story, if you have stopped even asking whether they will ever say it, then Leah's long silence is not a gap in this tale. It is the part of the tale that knows you. Because here is what the silence is about to prove. The meaning of this woman's life was never going to be delivered through that door. It was already in motion. Through her sons. Down roads nobody in that camp could see yet. The question the text refuses to answer turns out to be a question the text is quietly replacing. The question was, did he ever love her? The question becomes, what did her life turn into while she was waiting to find out? The years pass inside that silence. The family crosses back into Canaan and settles. And when the two sisters finally return to the center of the story, together, one last time, it is on the worst road of Jacob's life. Only one of them walks off it. They were on the road south from Bethel, in the land of Canaan at last, with some distance still to go before Ephrath. When Rachel went into labor, she was carrying her second child. Her first, Joseph, had come years before in Haran. After the text says, God remembered Rachel and listened to her and opened her womb. And she had named him with a prayer for one more. May the Lord add to me another son. This road was that prayer being answered. And the labor went wrong. The text says it plainly. She had hard labor, and as it grew worse, the midwife bent over her with the only comfort she had to give. Do not fear, for you have another son. The prayer answered out loud in the worst hour of her life. And as her soul was departing, for she was dying, Rachel named him. She called the boy Benoni, son of my sorrow, even at the end. This family speaks its truth through the naming of children. Leah's names were hopes. Rachel's last name was a wound. Her whole story pressed into 2 words and pinned to a newborn. The woman who once cried, "Give me children, or I shall die," received the children. And the second one cost her life. And Jacob, standing on that roadside, losing the love of his, did something Genesis records without explaining. He renamed the boy, not Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, but Benjamin, son of the right hand. It is the only time in the book a father overrules a mother's naming. And the text never tells us why. It only lets us notice that the man who could not save her would not let her sorrow become the word the family shouted across a field every time they called the boy for supper. So Rachel died, and they were still short of the town. And Genesis records the burial in a line that has broken hearts for 3,000 years. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem, and Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb. On the way, she was not buried in a city, and she was not buried in the family cave. The caravan was in open country, and the most loved woman in the book of Genesis was laid in the ground beside a road, and her husband raised a stone pillar over her. And the family moved on, because families on the move have no other choice. Travelers marked that pillar for centuries. It stands in the text like grief made solid, a monument that says a man was forced to leave his heart at a roadside and keep walking. Now, if you have been watching this story as a contest, and the story itself trained you to the scoreboard, the wrestling names, the traded knights, then somewhere in you a terrible bookkeeping is stirring right now. The rival is gone. The other tent is empty. After a lifetime of losing to her sister, Leah is the last wife standing. And some cold corner of the ledger wants to call that a result. Put the ledger down. This was never a game either. Sister could win. And this roadside is where that becomes completely clear. What exactly has Leah won? Her sister, the girl she grew up beside. The only other person on earth who knew that household from the inside, is under a pile of stones near Ephrath. Her husband is shattered in a way she will now live beside, married to a grief with her sister's name on it. Because the pillar tells the truth about where his heart went into the ground. There is no version of this where Leah stands taller. 2 women were placed in an arena by their father's greed and their culture's arithmetic. And they spent their lives contending for prizes that could not fill either of them. And now one of them is dead at the outcome of her own answered prayer. Nobody won. The arena was the tragedy. It always was. And the pain of that arena was not finished. Because pain like this does not stay in its generation. Watch what happens next in the text. Because Genesis draws the line itself, straight and unmistakable. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Loved more, hated, the exact vocabulary of Leah and Rachel's story. The words we have been living in for 15 chapters, repeating one generation down. And this time it is Jacob doing the measuring. Jacob, of all people, the man who grew up as the son his own father did not prefer. Isaac loved Esau, the text told us long ago, and who then watched two wives tear themselves apart over his own unevenly measured love. That man now takes his surviving piece of Rachel and loves the boy more than all his sons, visibly, daily, and finally sews the preference into a robe so that it can be seen across a field. And the brothers who saw it, the ones, the text says, learned to hate. Who were they? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Leah's sons, boys who had grown up watching their mother rank second, absorbing the whole silent lesson of that camp, that in this family, love is a contest and somebody's child wins it. Their father's favoritism did not create something new in them. It confirmed something old. The robe simply moved the ranking they had lived under all their lives onto their own backs. You likely know what those brothers did about it. The pit, the caravan, the robe dipped in goat's blood and carried home to a father who had taught them, without ever meaning to, exactly how much unequal love can make people hate. Favoritism is never a private wound. It compounds. It ran from Isaac's tent into Jacob, from Jacob into that camp of rival sisters, from the sisters into 12 boys, and from those boys into a crime that would relocate this entire family to Egypt. And it was still compounding. Decades later, when an old man in Egypt, blind and dying, and surrounded by those same sons, gathered his last strength to give them one instruction about a cave. We started this story there. It is time to go back. 17 years the family lived in Egypt, and then Jacob felt his death coming, and he called for his sons. This is the scene the whole video opened with, but you are not the same audience that heard it the first time. You know the names now. You know what every person in that room cost. So stand in it again and listen to a dying man give his last instruction on earth. I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. There I buried Leah. 5 words, dropped into the record with no explanation. And they are the first news we ever receive of her death. Somewhere in the silent years, the years the story stopped telling us, Leah died, and Jacob buried her. And he did not bury her by a roadside. He carried her into Machpelah, the cave Abraham bought with silver when Sarah died. The one piece of the promised land the family actually owned. The burial place of the covenant itself. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, the founding couples of the faith, laid pair by pair in the ancestral dark. And in the third place, in the spot beside Jacob's own, the wife from the wedding trick, the unloved one, here. And now the request itself. The man making it is in Egypt, far from that cave. And he is not asking for convenience. He is wealthy, honored, father of a ruling prince. He could be buried like royalty where he lies. Instead, he makes his sons swear an oath to carry his body all the way back to Canaan, to that specific field, to that specific cave. Hold three plain facts next to each other, because the text holds them and does not blink. Rachel, the wife he loved, lies by the road near Bethlehem, where the journey broke. Leah, the wife he never chose, lies in Machpelah, in the covenant ground, in the row of the mothers of the promise. And Jacob handed the last word on where he would spend the ages, asked for the cave. Now hold the reins hard, because right here is where a lazy telling ruins 50 chapters of truth. The comfortable ending is sitting right there, and we are not taking it. So he chose her after all. He loved her in the end. The text says no such thing. Not one word of tenderness toward Leah is recorded in that speech or anywhere else. If Genesis wanted to give this marriage a deathbed romance, it had every chance, and it stayed silent. And we will honor the silence one last time. Genesis never records that his heart changed. We do not know, and we never will. But look at what the text does say, because it is saying something bigger than romance. When everything temporary had burned off this family, the passion, the rivalry, the scoreboard, what remained standing was the covenant. And Leah had been woven into the covenant all along. In the place nobody thought to look, she was not in the love story. She was in the promise. The wife he chose is buried where his grief fell. The wife he never chose is buried where his faith lived. And at the end, the man asked to lie down in the faith. Because now count what came out of this woman. Count it slowly. Because this is the harvest of every tear in this story. Levi, the third son, the name of her most desperate hour. Now, this time my husband will be attached to me. From that boy's tribe came Moses, Aaron, the priestly line of Israel, every priest who stood before God on behalf of the people, generation after generation. For 1,000 years and more, the tribe whose whole calling was to be joined to God himself sprang from the son she named out of a craving to be joined to a man who never turned around. And Judah, the fourth son, the child of the one clear morning. This time I will praise the Lord. Follow that name down through the centuries. From Judah came a shepherd king named David. From David's line, king after king, the royal house of Israel. And when the New Testament opens, the very first page, the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the line runs straight through Judah, son of Jacob, son of Leah. The kings came through her, the Messiah in the flesh. True traces to the boy she bore in the single recorded moment. She stopped begging to be chosen and looked up instead. Out of all her children, that one, history put its full weight on the child of her freest morning. Centuries after her death, in the town of Bethlehem, a crowd gathered at the gate to bless a bride named Ruth. And listen to what the whole town said. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. Together, two names, side by side. No ranking, no asterisk. In the mouth of God's own people, the woman who spent her life losing a comparison is spoken in one breath with her sister. Equal, honored, a founding mother, and the couple receiving that blessing, Boaz and Ruth, became the great-grandparents of David himself. The whole town was standing inside Leah's legacy while it spoke her name. So here it is, the sixth lesson, the one the other five were building toward the entire time. The person who could not choose you does not get to decide what your life means. Say it plainly over this whole story. Jacob's love went to Rachel, openly, for a lifetime. And Genesis never records that this changed. And the priesthood came through Leah. The kings came through Leah. The name in the genealogy of the Messiah is the name of the son she bore in the one moment she stopped performing for a closed door. The man never chose her, and her life outgrew the man. She did not outgrow him by winning him. She outgrew him by mattering in a story so much larger than him that, standing at the far end of it, you can barely see him anymore. Which leaves one question, and it is not about Leah. It is about the person watching this, who is still living inside 2 words she wrote 3,000 years ago. There is a phone lying face up on a kitchen table tonight, and a message half written on the screen. You know whose kitchen it is. The names change, the message changes. The kitchen is the same everywhere. Maybe the message is aimed at a father, and it is a photograph of an award with a caption being rewritten for the 4th time. Casual enough not to look like begging. Impressive enough to maybe finally land. Maybe it is aimed at someone who left. A paragraph proving how well things are going. Polished like a resume for a job that was filled years ago. Maybe it is aimed at a sister the family always turned toward, or a mother who saves her warmth for somebody else, or a grown child who calls when it is useful. The thumb hovers. The message gets read one more time through their eyes, the way everything for years has been read through their eyes. And underneath the hovering thumb, 2 words are running the whole show. The same 2 words that ran a tent in Haran 3,000 years ago. Maybe now they will see it. Maybe now it counts. Maybe this photo, this news, this version of me, weighed and edited and sent at the right hour of the evening. Maybe this is the delivery that finally tips the scale. You have made this delivery before. So did she. She made it with sons, 4 of them, then 6, each one carried to the same door. And the door did not move. Reuben did not move it. 3 sons did not move it. 6 did not. The scale was never real. There was no tipping point, because it was never about the balance. It was never about her at all. The heart she kept knocking on had an occupant, and the next payment was always going to clear exactly like the last one did. Wanting to be loved was never your flaw. Let that be said once, plainly, because somewhere along the way you started treating the wanting itself like the defect. It is not. Leah wanted her husband to love her, and there was nothing shameful in that wanting. Not for one day of her life. The ache for a face to light up when you walk in. That is not weakness. That is the design. You were built for chosen. The wound is not that you wanted it. The wound is what the wanting was allowed to become. A currency. A career. Year after year spent converting every good thing you ever made into an offering for one unmoved audience. Until the achievements stopped being yours. Until your own life became a message addressed to someone who was not in the room. That is where the pain took the wheel. And a woman in Genesis drove that road to the end so you could see where it goes. It goes to a harvest evening, hiring what should have been freely yours. It goes to a smaller and smaller request. Love. Then attachment. Then just honor me. The ladder down. It does not go anywhere else. It never has. And her life still became what it became. Hold both of those in your hands at the same time, because both are true. The door never opened, and the priesthood walked out of her tent anyway. The verdict never changed, and the kings came anyway. And the genealogy of the Messiah runs through the child of the one morning she looked up. The people who did not choose you rendered their verdict a long time ago. It was a real verdict. It was never the last one, and it was never the largest one. And 3,000 years of history since one unloved bride is the evidence. So the thumb comes down, and it does not press send. It holds the message, and then it deletes it. One letter at a time, at first, then all at once. And here is the honest part. The part this whole story has earned the right to tell you. Deleting it does not feel like freedom. It feels like loss. Your chest will register that unsent message the way a tongue finds a sore tooth. Because you are not just putting down a habit. You are putting down a hope that fed you for years. And hope has weight even when it is starving you. Leah put it down and picked it back up. Judah, then Zebulun. The road out is not straight. It is only real. The feeling is not the measure. The direction is. The phone goes dark on the table. On the morning after the wedding, Jacob rolled over in the early light and looked at the woman beside him and saw the wife he had not chosen. It took the book of Genesis 50 chapters to finish answering him, because that was never who she was. It was only who she was to him, and those were never the same thing. Not for her, and not for you. He saw the wrong sister. Heaven saw a mother of kings. The people who did not choose you gave you their verdict. Somewhere tonight, a door you have knocked on for years is still closed, and it may stay closed for the rest of the story. Leah's stayed closed, and her name is in the mouth of history, and the child of her freest morning is in the family tree of God. So this time, like a tired mother said over her fourth son 3,000 years ago, this time, lift your eyes somewhere else. This time, let the door stay shut and live.